Hey YouTube, it's been a while, but I'm back. In this video, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord is a very important part of the central nervous system. It acts as a relay station for the brain. When your brain sends signals to your organs, they all pass through the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. So it is absolutely crucial to understand the anatomy of the spinal cord. We're going to be discussing it very briefly, but in future videos we can go into more detail. So let's start with the external structure. So first of all, the spinal cord is a cylindrical, well-organized structure. It begins at the foramen magnum as a continuation of the medulla oblongata at the base of the skull. It is located inside the vertebral canal. Now, the foramen magnum is the sort of outlet, the main outlet of your skull, at the base of the skull, which uh, all sorts of structures pass through it, including the spinal cord. Particularly, it's a continuation of the medulla oblongata, which is the terminal part of the brainstem. We're gonna talk about the brainstem in another video, but just know that the medulla oblongata is the last part of the brainstem, and then it continues as the spinal cord, and it passes through something called the vertebral canal. So we know the vertebral column is made up of individual vertebrae, and each segment has sort of a gap um, inside, to where when you stack them up together, it can form something like a canal. And we're gonna see it right now in this diagram. So you can see here the base of the skull. This is the spinal cord. It starts from here, and then it passes through inside the vertebral column until it terminates right here. Okay. So this is the vertebral column, this is the vertebral canal, and it starts right from the foramen magnum. Now, this is interesting. So let's talk about the if we take a cross section of the spinal cord, what are we gonna see? Now, what you see here, this H-shaped, this is the internal structure, which we're gonna be talking about later in the video. For now, let's talk about the external features. If you have this is a transverse cross section of the spinal cord, and what you see here is two distinct um, two distinct features. The first one is the anterior median fissure. So as the name, it's anterior. So ventrally, you would see this deep fissure, and posteriorly you would see a sulcus. So it's this crack, like but it's shallower than this anterior median fissure, so we call it the posterior median sulcus, and both are median because this is the uh, midline, right? So the spinal cord is divided into 31 spinal segments, and each spinal segment gives root to two spinal nerves. So in a separate section, you would see from this is let's say this is a spinal segment, this is a transverse section in a spinal segment. You would see a nerve, a spinal nerve from this side and a spinal nerve from this side. Okay, and these are the segments. So that each um, we said the spinal cord is a cylindrical structure, but it's divided into segments, similar to how the vertebral column is divided into vertebrae. Now, the structure, the numbering of the segments is a little bit different from the vertebrae. So we have, let me type this out. So we said we have 31 spinal segments. We have cervical, we have thoracic, and we have lumbar, and we also have um, sacral and coccygeal, but they're not visible here. But they're numbered like this. So we have 8. So we have number 1, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So this nets out to 31 segments, right? And we'll talk about why the sacral and coccygeal aren't really visible here. I mean, you can see uh, these are some spinal nerves, um, but they're not um, labeled. So what's interesting here is that if you remember the vertebral numbering, we have 7 cervical vertebrae and 12 thoracic. But here we have 8 cervical spinal segments. And that's because the first segment you see here, it's above the first cervical vertebrae. So this is vertebrae number 7. Um, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so this is number 7. And you can see that the spinal roots, the spinal nerves, they emerge from under that segment. And then starting from the thoracic, the same thing happens there, emerging from under these segments. So this is an important thing to note. It's not exactly the same segmentation as the vertebrae. Okay. Now this is very important. The spinal cord actually terminates between L1 and L2 vertebrae. Now this might seem strange because we do have sacral and coccygeal vertebral spinal segments, sorry. So you'd think that it terminates close to the coccyx, but that's not the case because actually as you go down, the segment, these segments start to get shorter and they get more vertical. We're gonna see this right now in this diagram. So you can see here, as I said, this is the first one, the first cervical spinal segment. It's above the C1, and then this is C2, and then C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, C8. So you can see C8 is under the C7 segment, and then this is T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, C6 until T12. You can see here, and then notice how the orientation of the segments changes. So they're not exactly vertical here. You can see as we get closer to the lumbar, the segments get shorter and shorter and shorter until it's very, very short, which you can see here. This is the last segment. This one here, this is the coccygeal. This is the coccygeal segment. We said we only have one, and you can see here that it's right in between the L1 and L2. So in terms of the segments, they actually terminate at this level between L1 and L2. But you can see the continuation of the nerves continues downward. And this is called the cauda equina, the cauda equina, which basically means like I think it means horse tail because it looks like a horse tail. Starting from the lumbar, you can see that the nerves get more and more vertical, and they bundle up into this like this bundle of fibers. So it looks like a cauda equina, basically. Okay, and the spinal cord terminates in a cone shape called the conus medullaris. Conus medullaris, okay? So basically terminates as a cone shape. We can see it here. This is the cauda equina right here. And then you can see this is the termination of the spinal cord, but the nerves continue downward until the coccyx. So this is the conus medullaris. Okay. Now, this is an important part relating to the meninges. Now, you might be familiar with the meninges of the brain, which, the brain is covered by these layers, these dura. Sorry, there's a typo here. This is the dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. These are three layers that cover the brain, and the same layers actually cover the spinal cords. So from outside to inside, the outermost layer is the dura mater. Then we have the arachnoid. And then we have the pia. Okay, and this diagram here shows it very clearly. Okay, we're gonna talk about this in a second, but let's look at this. So first we have the dura. You can see here. This is the outermost layer, and the middle layer is the arachnoid, and then the pia is directly covering the spinal cord. So between the pia and the arachnoid, there is actually a very significant space right here. This is called the subarachnoid space, right? So this is the subarachnoid space, and this is very important clinically because in this subarachnoid space, there is the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, is inside the subarachnoid space. And so if you want to sample CSF, this is where you would extract it, basically, from the subarachnoid space. So these are the three layers. Now there's an interesting fact about the PIA, which that it has extensions. So it has two extensions. First we have the filum terminal, and we have denticulate ligaments. So right here you can see the denticulate ligaments, which are basically extensions from the pia mater, and they anchor the spinal cord to the vertebral canal, basically. So they act as support, because we said the pia is directly attached to the spinal cord itself. So it acts as an anchor for it to stay stable inside the vertebral canal. And also, there's this extension which is called the filum terminal. Now, the internal part is the part that exists inside between the pia and the dura and arachnoid. Now, you can see the pia doesn't exactly terminate at the same level, which is the level of S2. The pia terminates at the level of S1. So this space, there's this cord extension called the filum terminal, and the internal part is called the internum, and the external part is the externum. Okay. Now this is it for the external structure. We talked very briefly about the spinal cord, its shape, its coverings. Now, very briefly, we're going to discuss the internal structure. So as we said before, this H-shaped, this is called the gray matter. And histologically speaking, this would be where all the cell bodies, the neuron cell bodies, would be located. And we have the white matter, which is basically all the axons of the cell bodies that are in the gray matter. And the difference in color, we say this is gray and this is white relatively because if you know the histology of the neuron is that usually it's covered by a myelin sheath, and this myelination makes the white matter appear more white relative or lighter in color than the gray matter. Okay, and inside this is the in the middle this is the central canal. Now, as we said, the gray matter is an H-shaped, so you can divide that H-shaped into a uh, posterior or dorsal horn and an anterior horn or a ventral horn. So we make this distinction because later when we talk about the internal structure, um, you'll know that usually the posterior horn is responsible for sensory information delivery, while the anterior horn is more for the motor function or the motor actions. And that's basically it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you benefited. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.